Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Erasmus Expeditions. This is going to be session number 8 of the Sunderhearth world building project. I'm very excited about what we've already covered so far with this project, and I can't wait until this is finished and I can start running games in it. I'm very, very proud to host this here on the channel because this was not my concept. This was not my idea. That was the property of my buddy Steve on the far side of the screen over there. So I'm going to pass things over to him so that he can say his introduction and whatever he was. No? Yes. I'm going to do it
Yes.
anyway. Okay. So that he can say hello, and then we will introduce our guest, and then we'll get started. So, Steve, take it away.
Yeah. So, like Jeremy said, this is a cooperative world building experiment. It'll run 12 sessions. This is session 8. Don't worry if you're jumping in now. Good place to jump in. You can always go back and review if you want. But the idea was to brainstorm a setting, but to bring in as many different people on it as possible. So we've had a different guest every month. With Jerry and myself sort of anchoring it and allowing their creativity plus creativity in the comments to sort of filter in and become what is going to or is becoming Sunderhearth. So yeah, four more sessions and we can start running games in it, maybe something along those lines. But looking forward to it. It's been a blast so far. So looking forward to tonight.
Yeah, man. I end every single one of these episodes like ready to start putting ideas down and fleshing them out, and I have to pump the brakes and stop myself because that's kind of goes against the spirit of this, and I don't want to plan in detail too much before we get done with this whole process. So, speaking of this whole process, I'm very excited tonight to welcome our guest to help us kind of recap and spice some things up. This is a very good friend of mine from real life. It's strange to call it that, but it is real life. And I've known him for a very long time. He plays in my home group. Mike, welcome to the show, man.
Hey, thank you for having me, guys. This project has been really amazing to see kind of start unfolding, and I'm honored to be able to be a part of it. This type of sounding board and just chit chatting about D&D, Jeremy and I have been doing since I was 14 years old, and it is, especially with everything in the world right now, not being able to get together. It's a part of my life that I'm drastically missing. So I'm very much looking forward to this evening. Everybody, I mean, you're calling it a recap episode. My personal outlook at it has been it's going to be hopefully a polish episode. So if you'll have some rough edges of ideas that you are have been trying not to think about, let's bring them up. Hopefully, I'll say something that sparks an idea in your head. I'm not looking to necessarily change your world, or I just want to be a part of it. So, so thank you for having me.
Absolutely, man. And feel free, throw out any ideas that you have. This is not simply just a tweaking things that have already been made. If you have something that comes up that's a neat idea, please feel free to.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll do.
Yeah. Yeah, man. I definitely miss getting to hang out with you guys in person. It sucks, the state of the world right now. But hopefully, very, very soon, we will be able to game together again and maybe even hang out afterwards and do this.
Maybe. Yeah.
Maybe. So, yeah, this has really been a lot of fun, and I'm excited to kind of see what you're going to add to the world of Sunderhearth. So if you guys are ready, then I suppose we can get this started. Steve, I think you were going to do the first thing, right? I think that was you.
Was it me?
That's what I have in my notes. Was
Oh yeah, I forgot that that's the only thing that we have completely pre-planned was that Steve was going to jump into this completely off the cuff, and yeah. All right, so I like the idea of it being a sort of polishing, because we do try and cover so much. Like these sessions are so large, right? When you talk about like race or magic or religion, it's so large to try and cram into an hour and 15 minutes. that we're definitely going to have to polish a lot of this. Um, yeah, so
Maybe we should talk about magic. We haven't touched
we
on
could
that a
talk
lot,
about
so
we could talk about magic a little
Okay,
bit.
so bringing up magic, one of the things I have on one of my bulleted lists here, and whenever y'all first started talking about Sunderhearth and like the outer rim being more civilized and less magical and less chaotic, I drew a target with a bullseye on my little scratch pad that I had next to me. That y'all then further delve into later in the episode. So a lot of the notes that I was originally jotting down, y'all ended up covering. So I just stopped taking notes and decided it was more in the spirit of everything to not have anything prepared. So let's talk about that, the bullseye and the outer rings of the magic that is Sunderhearth.
Okay. So one of the things that came up in episode 7, right? And maybe this is the first thing we start polishing. It's the most recent stuff with Rachel, right? Yeah. We talked about that at the center of it. There is this sort of almost sentient area. I think we had called it the witness.
Yeah.
It's a void. It's sort of surrounded by the void. We talked about maybe they're being like those sort of undead int-like creatures that live there. So it's kind of weird, right? Because right around the most magical portion of all of Sunderhearth, you have this void where kind of nothing really exists, and that sort of becomes its own impenetrable barrier. But yeah, I think the bullseye is a great representation, right? So as you sort of ring out from it, magic is less common, perhaps is the best way of saying it. Like it's also a bit more organized. We had talked very early on that there's probably still people who use mending or light or stuff like that, the everyday sort of cantrips, because without the loss of magic, those people could still be reliant on it, and it's very easy to be reliant on things like that. But I think Jeremy made the comparison, or actually, it might have been my dad. It's weird to confuse you two. That that said it was kind of like water in a desert, right? Yeah, you're going to use it, but you're not going to waste it. So I think that's like the two polar opposites. The center, everything's magic. They use magic for everything. It's almost addictive to be further into that chaos, to become part of it. Even down to the point where the chaos is its own entity that is roaming around, and the outside is quite the antithesis. So that being laid out, like, what ideas does that spark for either of you?
I like the idea of the magic having somewhat of an addictive quality. Maybe not to the same degree as like an addictive substance necessarily. That's a note that I hit hard in a lot of my settings. But like you said, it's the ability to have that power to be able to do the things that other people can't do.
Right.
A lot of people get drunk on that in the real world. So I would imagine that a lot of the people that delve furthest into Sunderhearth are almost like rock stars. They're these kind of edgy people who are willing to take things further than anyone else, and they're kind of self-absorbed a little bit, to the point where they might even like advertise the fact that they're willing to go into the Sunderhearth for people who need things or want things from the center, because other people are so unwilling to do so on their own.
Okay, so should that be like an organized, not necessarily organized, but like a labeled group of people that?
I was almost seeing it, like I said, either like a rock star or like famous gunslingers in the Wild West. It's like,
Okay.
Right.
somebody rolls into town and they're like, "Oh my God, that's so and so. He's done this and that." Like they're legends essentially.
And even if they're not legends yet. The fact that, because we talked about the more magic, the more chaos you touch, the more of a physical representation manifests. These are, you're gonna have the guy who has a snake eyes, and he's got a stripe of fur down his back, and because of the panache that she handles everything with, she's not rejected. Right? It's the Ozzy Osbourne biting the head off of a bat, and people in the audience going, "Holy crap, that's cool," versus "What a freaking weirdo," right? Like, because there were both extremes. But the gunslinger is a great analogy. These are guys and women who maybe don't have another way to make a living, right? So they do these super dangerous things for the living, and then for the fame, and then for the adrenaline addiction, and then as they get deeper and more lost, they start doing it for the actual knee, exactly, trying to hit that vein with the next delve in there. And then you've got people who are running after the mana kernels, right? Like people from the outside that, since this has been discovered, that are now these deep delvers, or I don't know, chaos walkers, whatever you want to call them, that are willing to go that far to retrieve these things. And they're not the rock stars, right? These are the super secret counterpart to those rock stars. And sure, they may cross streams, right? You may have the rock star who also sells these mana kernels, but there's sort of two walks of life, three if you count adventurers, who are willing to delve that far in. Because even some of the groups that we've created, the paladin clerics, who are like what do you call them, the wayfinders? I don't remember what we called them right a second. The ones who make sure that when you die, you don't turn into an undead. You've got the old clerics that were worshippers of the shattered god or sundered god, who are trying to put him back together, right? Even they don't delve deep to the center. They kind of, it's almost like an orbit, right? Like these different groups have their own orbit that they stick in and tend to radiate out, but very few are willing to press in.
Yeah, and I think that's good too, because that gives the potential for even when you're kind of in deep country, when you're really close to the center, you still have the capability of running into NPCs and it not being completely out of the ordinary. You're not going to run across a city or a village full of these people, but you may run across a camp with two or three of them, or another party of adventurers or something, and it still won't constantly be this, what are you doing here? You're the only living person we've seen for 2 months.
And I really like that idea where it's not going to be every single thing that you see towards the epicenter, towards the actual sundering point, be an encounter of combat or something like that. There's that allows for a lot more rich of a atmosphere, a lot more rich of an environment for play. I like that a lot.
We had talked about the closer you got to the center, the more twisted the actual landscape becomes. And even to the point, where now at the center, there's this sort of sentient mountain, hill, plateau that is witness to everything that's ever happened. So, kind of bouncing off what Michael said, you don't have to have all these combat encounters. One of the fun things in D&D is solving those puzzles, right? Like getting past those. And so if you are near the center and the landscape changes, right? Like you have this maze of a ravine that shifts when the party goes to sleep at night, because the chaos is there to be chaotic. That becomes its own challenge and quite maddening and resource intensive, but it's not the same roll dice hit monster kill monster. Yeah, that plays into something we talked about really early on about taxing the sanity of Sunderhearth.
Yeah, so you said that, and it sparked the idea of you go into this like grove or through these trees, and then it's all very lush and very overgrown, and you find a clearing to make your camp. And unbeknownst to the party, the entire area is alive, and it is effectively like an assassin's vine type thing, but it changes the entire landscape around you, trapping you inside of a maze. And it's trying to kill you the entire time. It's something to bounce around, I guess.
Sounds terrifying. And you have to find your way out of this maze while this thing is also shifting and trying to kill you, and that sounds awful.
Right. What does it mean when you can't go to sleep because you don't know which bush is going to strangle you in the middle of the night and which one you can actually, pick berries from?
Or, if the seasons will change while you're sleeping, or,
right.
You end up in the Feywild somewhere.
And that's one of the beautiful things with Sunderhearth, the way that we've there's parts that we've sort of are beginning to nail down and are a little more written and defined, and there's parts that we've just sort of sketched and said, here's some ideas, right? And so if you want to mess with time continuity, not time travel, but if time passes differently as you get towards the center, if the seasons change, if you cross a river and now are in the Feywild, or you're on Carceria or whatever, one of the other planes, like that's all so possible in this environment. That it's interesting because we've kind of created a dungeon in a sense, right? Because there's an outer wall, and once you're in till you're out. But it's so expansive and unlimited in a confined area. It's the idea of the old mega dungeons. It's kind of cool that accidentally happened. One of the things that you said I thought was really interesting, Jeremy, just a second ago, was talking about that you wouldn't really find towns or cities or villages the closer you got. And I was thinking that you probably wouldn't, but would you find like the shadows of them, right? These weird assemblies of buildings that don't really have things that directly live in them, but it's that sort of almost like the echoes, the memories of being people that has manifested in these things, and nothing's there till you enter it, and all of a sudden it's a semi-populated village, and
by those that escaped from the Wayfinders.
I mean,
to be destroyed, so they go deeper in where nobody will chase them.
Yeah, so I mean, essentially, you have. I mean, I love that. So the spirits of those who don't want to travel over but can't stay around because essentially these paladin clerics are going to hunt them down and destroy them. They're not malevolent ghosts. They're that echo of what they were, and so they've collected in these sort of shadow villages that aren't really tangible or existent until someone steps into them, and then it starts to take on this life form. Like you can see it in a Miyazaki film, right? Like that's a very him thing to do.
And I almost see like some of these rifts are more permanent than others. So like these people who have escaped, they literally have figured out, okay, well, we have to go to this tree, the head of this trail around this tree, and then you have to walk around this tree this way, and you actually will go to through a shard, a shatter point, into a different realm, and you do that, 2 or 3 times, and that's how you actually get to where our village is. You have to make sure that you follow this kind of complicated pathway, using landmarks, but the landmarks are literally like these fractures in reality that lead to different planes of existence.
So something you just said, I think, is incredible when you to work it into the lexicon, a shatter point. So we keep talking about like Sunderhearth and the Sundered God and stuff like that, but if there are portions of existence, of reality, that weren't sundered, they were simply shattered. And those are the points that, take a glass mosaic and break it, and take one part of it, put it over here, one part of it, put it over here. they're still connected, and that becomes the point that you could travel through, because they're two shattered portions of that same reality. I think that's awesome. I think that is an interesting way to allow sort of quicker travel were you to know it. If you're familiar with Wheel of Time, like where the Ogiers could travel through. So they had created a system of traveling through the shadow world, much faster but much more dangerous. Same idea, right? It allows that sort of quick travel. It allows for this interesting dynamic of, you want to tell this story that is situated more in the chaos, and so traveling through a shatter point allows you to get there without that intervening, travel if you don't want to have it. But I think having these spirits that have learned how to do that is awesome.
And maybe that's how teleportation magic works. Is like you actually move between these cracks in reality from point to point. And you can't just pick a spot and teleport to that spot. You have to go to the closest, existing fracture.
Circle.
Exactly. Or if you do teleport to a designated spot, you have a very high chance of causing a new fracture point in that spot.
Or whenever you roll to see if you made it to your destination, if you failed, where you land is a new fraction point.
I think that last part would be 100%. If you're doing a sort of blind teleportation and you don't nail it, you're just going to pop out at another fracture at another shatter point. Like it's just how the world adjusts to you doing that. Now, I don't think like if you're doing things like Misty Step and such like that, you have to worry about it too much. But it's the big magic, right? Because like it's one of the things. Yeah, we talked about that too. Is like the bigger the magic, the more risk you are bringing. Like I feel sorry for the first person. It's like, yeah, sure, I can raise the dead. Maybe we don't do that in here. I can bring you back. I'm good.
Awesome.
Okay,
Really cool.
so yeah, so is resurrection magic does it not work at all, or is it just an extreme chance of bringing them back as undead or something like that? Like what does that look like?
So to me, resurrection magic existing in D&D is kind of a bogus thing. It eliminates the penalty of death. So in most games I run, the spell exists, but there's very few people are going to cast it for you without some sort of quest, right? It's the having to travel to the underworld and grab their soul and bring it back, and then the resurrection spell is sticking it back in their body, or something along those lines. Generally, it's got to be pretty epic because it's a pretty epic thing that you're doing. So maybe it's the idea that you sort of have to travel through one of these shatter points to go find that soul that didn't want to go, right? But that's one of the stipulations of resurrection, is that the being has to be willing to come back, otherwise the spell fails. So if they wanted to be able to come back, they'd probably be one of those spirit souls that had found their way to one of these echoey towns or villages that are still sort of running around inside of Sunderhearth versus having fully crossed over.
What about if, in order for you to actually resurrect a being, like get their soul back into their body, you have to hire the same people that are typically the ones that escort the souls to the afterlife. Like they have to go get the person's soul and bring them back in order to impart them back into their body.
Right, and that becomes part of like the mechanical cost of
right and
of doing
time.
it. And if you didn't want to go through that, if you're like, no, we'll go get it ourselves, sounds like a pretty awesome adventure to me.
Exactly. Yeah.
So what's the vessel that you have to transport this soul through or in?
I mean, it's got to be like an arcane kernel.
Yeah,
that's kind of what I was thinking.
Yep.
Right.
Which is kind of weird in and of itself, because now you have to go get a part of another person's body from a time past to cram your buddy's soul into so you can drag it back. Which,
yeah.
Then what if you bring the wrong one back?
Which then, I mean, it now makes there this weird currency of the arcane kernels inside of Sunderhearth. Very rarely are they used because most people aren't asking for their loved ones to be brought back, but occasionally, sure.
If you're important
So,
enough.
right. And so maybe like canonically, historically, that's how the power of these arcane kernels was originally sort of found out. These wayfarers knew that they could imbue a soul into it, and then some wizard went, wait a second, that means it's really powerful magic. Oh, look, I got my spells back. And then that's what sort of transitioned into people realizing you could recharge magic with it.
Okay, so
that puts a nice bow on it.
How about this? The arcane kernels, the reason that they work is because the soul is embedded in these. And when the magic is recharged from them, they're still present. They're a battery. They're just empty. And in order to bring a soul back, that's why they work as a vessel, because before that's what they are. They're soul holders. But the empty ones can be used to carry souls back from the dead.
All right, I'm loving this. So the wayfarers and the people inside of Sunderhearth understand, at least a lot of them do, what these arcane kernels are. This was part of a person who suffered this horrific fate. And almost none of them, if any of them, are actually the clerics of the Shattered God, right? They were far enough away. That's part of their living remorse, is they see these things. That means that kernel has to be emptied before it can be refilled with your buddy's soul. So you kind of come to a branch here and you go, okay, there's a proper way to do it through a ceremony where so I would think that for rightfully processed arcane kernels, it's an expense inside of Sunderhearth, right? Because these wayfarers have taken his soul, brought it across, and dropped it off. And these are not happy souls. These are tormented souls because of what happened to them. So it's not the same gentle process that they do with everyday funerals. This is something extra. Or you can buy that bunk one from the dude in the alley in the back, but that means he probably sucked someone's soul out to recharge some sort of magic item, and is that type of people you want to be dealing with.
And just to, I guess, clarify and to double check for me, when somebody dies, they don't create one of these. This happened during the Sundering, correct? And is there just so many of them that it's almost a renewable resource, or is there something that renews them?
I don't think so. I think it's a finite source.
Yeah.
But how finite is going to depend on the scope of what you want to do in the game.
And also, like, the way that I pictured is, like, when this thing happened, when this god was sundered and split, and this explosion happened, it was basically on a battlefield. So, I mean, there's thousands of people. It was, like an inter-kingdom battle. So there were thousands of people, that were fielded on the battle. And you're not just people, horses, and, any other living creature that happened to be
right
in so many miles of this thing. So I think the ones that have been kind of the outliers would be the ones that would be gone, harvested, if you want to think of it that way. But the closer that you get to the middle, I think it would be almost this treasure trove of these things, if you were of a mind to do such a thing. But it's nice because it really kind of drives home the magic is, it has this really warped, fucked up layer to it where you have to be of a very specific kind of mindset to be able to deal with it.
The other thing, the way you just phrased it, brings up is there might be grades and quality to arcane kernels. Right? The closer you were to the epicenter, perhaps the more pure it is. And then when you get to the animals, maybe regardless of where they were, maybe they're a watered down version of it because they didn't have the same soul that people had. And if you're thinking, oh, there was 30,000 people out in this battlefield, well, you don't necessarily have 30,000 kernels, because some of them were just destroyed. Some of them were shattered in a way that they're now some of these revenant monsters. Some of them were immediately turned into these undead horror spider rock monster, combine whatever you want here type things. And that's part of the horror of it too. And then you have these monsters we talked about that feed off of the arcane kernels. So trying to get to one of those ones in the center, the ones that are more pure, the ones that are stronger, that's rougher, because these monsters are drawn to those as well.
Josh just pointed out a really cool thing in the chat. He was talking about that since it's a finite source, there's always going to be wizards that are trying to make an endless source out of it. So yeah, you have these wizards who are experimenting on people, trying to recreate this process.
Okay, so could that there was an episode that y'all talked about, like this, like part of the god had got shattered, and then this entity was creating these beasts or something, and like they would hunt you down, and either could that be a manifestation of some wizard or something that created that, and they suck your soul out or something like that?
So I think the one you're talking about, we talked about the shattered god being sort of broken into his hidden ego. Yeah. And the ego is these rambling monsters that are trying to get magic back because it belongs to him. So they seek out the use of magic. The more magic you use, the more enticing you become for these things. But to have, wizards who are trying to recreate these arcane kernels, to have by proxy created other versions of these beasts that, I love the idea that there's a wizard out there who's basically made a Sunderhearth version of a vampire, but instead of, turning into a vampire, it pulls your soul out. Like, he's like, yeah, cool. So I can't get a arcane kernel, but I really need the spell to work. So I'm going to send my goons out, and they're going to rip the soul out of this, a couple people in this village. And that's how I'm going to use the power of the magic, because I can't get my hands on what I want. And so you have these, I'm bad at Harry Potter. I apologize. Dementia. Yep. No, Dementors. Nailed it. Type thing, right? Where they're like doing that sort of like that soul sucking. I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I really like that. I love the idea that it's basically this massive bomb that went off, and the radiation has worked its way into everything in this area, but the things in this area want and need to continue to absorb and take in this radiation. It's almost like a thing that they now have to have, because it's kind of in their, just like everything else inside of Sunderhearth, the trees, the water, the rocks, it's inside them even. Mm-hmm. So they almost need it to keep going.
And then, not to derail that thought, but one of the things before we get too far away from it, wanted to bring back up was the purity based on like the distance away from the explosion kind of thing. I think that should potentially be campaign specific, because if the DM wanted to have it be based on the alignment of the individual and how pure they were, have that be the reasoning behind it. And so the ones that are really, really pure, the ones that are really potent, are the ones that you really they deserve like a good afterlife, but they're the ones that you really want to not give it to because it's more powerful.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea, leaving it to the story, just suggesting that there should be a continuum of how strong these things are, and then what differentiates, right? Because it gives you more muffin in your MacGuffin, so that there's a reason for people to want to or not want to go after and use. If you're like, oh yeah, all the pure ones were definitely babies. Okay, that's super wicked, but it makes your villain even worse, right? Because that's what he's doing.
And in the chat, a night girl kind of brought something similar to that up and was talking about, does the happiness or the status of the soul affect the probability of it working, or like we were talking about, making it maybe a pure source. So it could have even been based on their emotional state whenever they went. Similar to like in Stardust, how the witches, they want the star to be happy and at peace and in love even, before they sacrifice it, so that way it's worth more essentially to them.
That ties in with Mike's idea about the wizards who are trying to recreate this and ending it with those dementors, because they probably weren't using real good people to try this magic on, and so you get these like crooks and thieves and that they're trying to create these kernels out of, and instead they create these monsters. But now you have a monster who is, Sunderhearth empowered, can feel the magic much like the Sundered gods, ego pieces. And they were already robbers and assassins, so like that's just good employment at that point. Like, oh yes, your resume, very impressive. We will get much crystal.
There's also something in all of this that reminds me of Castlevania, the anime that they put out on Netflix. There's a character in that that's kind of able to do some of these kinds of things. He basically is able to bring people back as like various kinds of demons. So I really like the fact that kind of ties in a way to what we're talking about, where there literally could just be some wizard who's just made himself this army of abominations out of these failed experiments, and has now grown so much in power that he may have taken over part of the the outside of the cities along the wall of the inside of Sunderhearth, and now somebody has to go and take that back from them. There's a lot of really good campaign and story material that's coming out of all of this. It's nice.
And before we lose it completely, because I kind of feel we're getting kind of close to the ending of this topic potentially, having a set kernel that's out there that was like a high priest or somebody that a group wants adventurers to go out and get, but having like a set, there is like King Arthur was out there, and his husk, we want to put him at peace because he was such a good leader or such a good individual or something to that effect. I think that would be cool just to have as like a nugget of history out in the world.
As sort of like that beacon out in the darkness, like that overarching. So we know that the god of magic was manifest when they sacrificed him. So if the more mortal form that he took left behind a kernel, like the kernel, and whether you're like, we want that for power, or we need that to be able to heal him, or we need that to set the world right, or we got to extinguish that so chaos goes away. Like there's so many millions of different ways to tweak that. And if we look at the witness as this sort of like plateau, and we said there was some ruins on top of it from ages gone by, if it becomes this sort of like lighthouse, right, this beacon in the darkness, because that arcane kernel of the shattered god sits inside that area, then it's this really beautiful imagery, right, of that magic sort of lighting it, but it also becomes that tempting beacon for all of the evil. They know where it's at. There's no hiding it. So it's not a matter of it's lost. It's a matter of who's brave enough, strong enough, or dumb enough to go after it.
And maybe it's too big to even be transported. So maybe you can't ferry it to. So like I got the image of basically like Sauron's eye Like it's up high. It can be seen from almost anywhere, but it's a beacon of hope instead of something to be scared of. Like I like that a lot.
And while you were talking, I was also thinking about how many like kernels would you be able to harvest from a single individual? Like a lot of times when we're talking, it sounds like just the one, but the way that I was kind of thinking about it in my mind is almost like this went out in like a spider web, or again like fractured glass, kind of just out in every direction. And the way that I've kind of been picturing it is along those fracture lines, just going through anything living, that vein is what has been changed. So you'd have to almost harvest it out of a corpse the way you would have to follow a vein inside of a mountain when you were mining. Like you have to chisel actual bone away from this piece that's been physically altered by this thing that literally just shot through everything in a straight line. And so like close to the center where this is really dense and concentrated, all the radii kind of meet, you actually have these like intricate sculptures almost, where these people were almost connected from where, you know, their hands were on each other, or you know, man and horse, you know, now has like, you know, a straight line kind of going all the way through it, that kind of thing. So you almost have this, I don't know, like a really, really dense concentration of all of these intersecting lines as you get really, really close to the middle.
So I was under the impression that these kernels came from the organs, and y'all may have changed that, and I didn't catch it. So could this be something entirely different? Like it is a thing, and I really, really like it, but or I don't know.
So I know we had talked about it being the organs like the heart or the brain, but
Yeah, absolutely.
the idea that it is that you have this sort of like, you know, the closer you are to the center, the more, you know, radii you were hit by, and the more of you that had the potential to become this this energy source is, it's really interesting. I don't know what to do with it, because like the fact that you have to carve away the body to get to it, I think is a definite thing, right?
Yeah.
Because it makes it a little more grotesque to have to do this. I also really like the idea that you're digging into the center of the being to do it, because we're comparing this to, you know, to a vessel for a soul now, right? And most, you know, religions where, you know, they would point inside of them somewhere for their soul. But exactly how that manifested, I think, is kind of up to artistic interpretation. Like I really love the idea that you know, towards the center of it, there's this, you know, like the Roman shield wall, right? They saw the explosion coming, they shielded up. You have like their commander standing at the back of them, his hand on one of their shoulders, and that entire line just boom. And so they're outside of their equipment, they're all crystalline, right? Maybe it was the way that the wave hit them. Maybe it was intersecting points. Maybe it was a sheer amount of bravery and the thought of brotherhood that they stood in the face of this that allowed them to manifest that way. Now, does it necessarily make it any stronger of a crystal than, you know, a small one that you got from someone else? I think that just comes down to your storytelling of how intense the magic is inside of it. But that imagery, use it, right? That's beautiful imagery. Why would you not use that? I think that's a wonderful idea, Jeremy.
Okay, cool. So what else do we have? Hey, we talked about magic.
You forced us to. I mean,
Nailed it.
Oh, my arm
It's
is
true.
twisting so hard.
Magic all the time.
Soulfarers. All I have to do is actually look at my notes. I'm good at this.
Wayfair, that was close. That was close.
Yeah. What Wayfair? If you want to get a stolen kid, just buy this cabinet. It's old news. So Ben Fisher in episode 6, his signature was these chaos sorcerers. There we go with magic again, right? And the note I have from it says they grew up using magic more than other people. They have more characteristics of the crazy chaos than others, and that there was going to be a subclass of sorcerer that we're going to work out the mechanics on.
So are they the ones that use the souls for their casting?
That was exactly what my brain was thinking, was that to the good version of them, the heroic version of them, is going to tax onto that. We had talked about using the sanity table. So that's the representation of that, is when they cast, they're rolling on that sanity because they're taxing their own soul to do it. They don't need a focus at all. They're taxing themselves to be able to do it. The more corrupt, chaotic version of them, because they push that to the limit. That's why they are crazy as they are. Now they're grabbing these souls. They're using it to power their magic, so that they're no longer having to chance completely losing it to chaos, right? So that may be a direction to go with that. That is, I think, apropos of the setting.
So I like the idea of there being one of these out there that went too far and either drained his entire soul and is now refilling his living essence by these kernels, and he's not necessarily himself anymore. Yes, it's still his brain, it's still his everything, but whichever soul he puts into himself, that changes maybe his abilities or what he's capable of doing or his motivation, until he uses up all of that magic and then has to do it again. I think that could be a very interesting NPC out in the world.
So if we took that and expanded it, do we get soul golems?
Yeah.
Ones that chaos sorcerers have literally put together out of. So Josh threw out this term earlier, that the failed experiments that are kind of like the Dementors, instead of calling them like anything to kernels, call them husks, and I think that's wonderful. So basically, you got this guy who's created these husks, and then one step further, where he's using these semi-drained arcane kernels, and he's jamming them back into these bodies of things where the soul's departed. And so it's got a piece of this person's soul and a piece of this person's soul, a piece of this person's soul. But like Mike said, so you have, mechanically speaking, maybe you have this this golem who has the druidic ability to wild shape a little bit, a barbarian's rage, and can cast a couple of sorcerer spells. I don't want to mess with that, but that's because those chunks have been shoved into him, and that becomes another.
I mean, I don't want to say template, but
right. It's like a patchwork soul, right?
It's like Frankenstein's
a patchwork
monster.
golem.
Right. It's like Frankenstein's monster, only it's not purely physical.
Right. And if you tone it down, maybe these are things that can be made. And if you leave it toned up, it becomes Frankenstein's monster. There's one of them, but it's still this scary thing that exists. I like that.
Very cool. Yeah. What's next? Anything else that we can think of? Anything else from the notes that wasn't fleshed out enough, or
something that has rough edges that needed polishing?
I'm trying to think of something.
I have something written down that has to do with magic. I'm sorry, but said in one of the episodes that magic is contagious and you can get sick and die. Have y'all expanded upon that at all?
Ooh, no, I don't even remember that.
I also don't remember that.
That's interesting.
Then let's talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, so we know that magic works out of Sunderhearth because essentially there's radiant magic around, not godly magic, but radiation of magic around, and that's why people can still tap it and use it. That's essentially this chaos in the air, in the energy, whatever you want to call it. And that's why as you get closer to the epicenter, the stronger it becomes, the more twisted you become, the sicker you become because you're affected by it. So how do we translate that into the idea that magic is contagious? We talked about magic users would have some sort of physical manifestation, and at certain points, maybe they pick up another physical manifestation. It's nothing crazy, right? You just grow scales or a tail or hair. Like, it's not gonna give you abilities or really detract from you, except for in the role play aspect of it. But does there come a point where so much magic is used or around you or on you that you're now affected by it? I.e., if someone, is like, hey, I'm going to, lay on hands for 85 points of hit points, which is a lot of lay on hands, does that magic then translate over to you? And do you, as the recipient, now take on some physical manifestation of it?
What if the radiation of magic could only potentially get you sick if you're outside of Sunderhearth? That's part of the effect of bringing magic outside of this containment field somehow, is the half-life that you have as a magic user. Part of what you're doing when you cast a spell is kind of dispersing this energy, so to speak. And it may not give anybody the capability of, standing up after getting healed and casting fireball in a direction, but, the next time that they sit down and think, man, I forgot my tankard across the room, the tankard just levitates and crosses the room into their hand. Something that's not really controlled necessarily, but it's just kind of this leeching out of capability.
So, if the magic is contagious, does that mean that everybody inside Sunderhearth has some sort of innate spellcasting?
I think like Jeremy was saying, and I think it's a great idea, is maybe Sunderhearth, because of what it is, can abate that, right? Like, magic is so prominent there that radiation is just absorbed back into Sunderhearth itself.
Okay.
But outside, where there is no magic, there's nowhere for it to go. So that expelled energy has to exist somewhere. And so, you heal that guy for 85 points, and next time he sits down and he's like, man, my tankard, and it just mage hands over to him. Well, that's weird. Or he, some other aspect of having been subject to so much magic, and then the areas, I guess maybe story wise, because I don't know how you do it mechanically, you have your magic users who have chosen to leave Sunderhearth because having magic outside makes them powerful, right? Being a small fish in Sunderhearth means nothing, but being a small fish where there are no other fish. So, but when they stay out there and are being brought these arcane kernels to recharge, that magic is constantly radiating from them. And so things start to happen. Plants grow larger, or, there's always a constant breeze, or it's constantly drizzling in this one spot, or, there's dancing lights that don't ever go away because they were cast one time as a cantrip joke, and they've stayed because of the radiation. Nothing major, but something that if you were on the outside, you go, all right, well, someone who uses a lot of magic lives there, because they become that manifestation of Sunderhearth outside of Sunderhearth, right? They become their own epicenter. And so they start affecting the world around them just by leeching out their magic.
Well, and magic used to be prevalent the world over. And so now this land that is devoid of magic, that very suddenly was found devoid of magic, is almost like a dry sponge. Now it's willing and accepting of absorbing freely this leeching magic that's kind of been happening. And especially, like you said, if somebody is staying in the same place and using magic repeatedly over and over again, especially, like these arcane kernels, then that portion of land is going to be saturated with magic eventually. It's, again, like dripping water onto a dry sponge. That one spot is going to start getting more and more water that it holds, and it's going to start expanding out when it can hold no more water.
I like that a lot because then like it paints a target on your head or your back where it's like it's a witch, burn them, kind of thing because it's causing issues in the area. There's also someone in chat, might be your dad from the picture, is saying that's also why clerics don't use their magic to heal people outside because stuff like that will happen. So they do it very sparingly, like water in the desert kind of thing. But
Right. Yeah. You're sure not having someone cast resurrection outside of Sunderhearth, right? There's no telling what that amount of magic being dumped would cause.
so, are there people that will ferry their dead into Sunderhearth to try to have them resurrected there? I think
100%.
Absolutely.
And in fact, that's probably something that the Hearth Wardens have forbade. Like, trust us, we don't need any more dead things in here. We have enough of them.
So the Dowsers
sneak in bodies to some of these outer ring, not wall cities, but inner ring cities, where practitioners of magic who are a little more chaos touched are like, yeah, no problem. I know a couple of soulfarers that are not busy. They're willing to do some small stuff for a small fee, but money doesn't mean much in Sunderhearth. So now it becomes this transaction of favors. And what do they need? And well, yeah, we can bring Joe back, but see that gargoyle looking thing over there? That's my cousin. He needs to get out of here because he's used too much magic. So we need, there's so much story opportunity there. But yes, people definitely show up and are like, hey, can you raise my brother?
So
go ahead.
Some of the creatures and like monsters that are inside of Sunderhearth, they're actual people. And if you can get them to go outside, and if they're there long enough, they will revert back to themselves, but they'll terrorize the countryside in the meantime.
Yep.
I love it.
100%.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I wanted to bring up whenever you mentioned that, Steve, and that's perfect.
Sorry, we think too much alike.
We've been hanging out too long. No, it was fantastic, man. That was exactly where my mind went. And I had a second point, and I may have just brain farted on it now. What was I going to say? Damn it.
Yeah, a Nightgirl is a good point. So if you bring that gargoyle-looking brother out to try and let him change back to normal, that magic has to go somewhere. And so it leaches back out into the world again.
Absolutely.
But at that point, it's not that you have someone who's conducting magic and that's affecting the world. If they are so far gone that they're a monster that their family had to capture and then have you bring out, when it leaches out, that is chaos leaching out. It's not going to be a gentle rain that constantly keeps falling over them or the flowers turning purple. It's going to be this entire field of pumpkins just turned into pumpkin monsters with assassin vines, and that's not good.
Depends on who's telling the story.
Halloween edition. I
remembered my other point now. And because I'm a huge fan of the Altered Carbon show, I think discount, sometimes people will put a different soul back into your cousin's body that you've brought back. So yeah, you get your cousin back, but it's quick and easy. Really your cousin. Yeah.
Right. Or wow. Yeah, so like we got this cheap soul. Here you go, dunk. So you get like that patchwork where it's part of your cousin's soul was attached to the physical. That's how it knew what it was supposed to be. But now you have this, other soul in there. Or other ones are like, you know what? We've been looking for a strapping barbarian body to put our overlord into. Thanks for bringing him. Sunk.
God, I love it. It's so awesome.
So Prince Robert is now rampaging around screaming about drinking blood. This is a problem. And I think that becomes the other thing, right? Like the average citizen on the outside isn't going to have the money to get into Sunderhearth, right? We've already established it's hard to get in. You need a writ from the Council of Martyrs. You need a hearth warden. You need to get in contact with dowsers. Right? There's entire tent cities that exist outside because they're waiting to go in for these semi-religious pilgrimages or whatever. So the average person's not having Aunt Barbara brought back. These are like kings and really rich merchants and stuff that are going to get this done no matter what. So there's not even a guarantee you're bringing back a really good person. And even if so, like you bring in the body where the magic is capable, but you still have to find some soulfarers who are willing to go and get it. But most soulfarers, because they're tied to the hearth wardens, go, no, he's not from here. So that only leaves you finding adventurers or crazy ass dowsers who are also willing to make that journey to, one of these shatter points, to go find the soul. And that's not fun.
And I like the thought that there is this industry, even, that, yeah, it may not be people just bringing back their relatives or, people who were good, military generals or good leaders or powerful leaders or what have you. If, so-and-so, the farm boy who was, 6'8" and clocked in at 300 pounds and was all, rippling muscle, but wasn't quite all there, his body crosses over into Sunderhearth in the middle of the night because, yeah, they've got just the right mind that they now want to put, the Ivar the Boneless, this, crippled, warlord who's genius but had a hard time, storming a battlefield. Now they're going to take his soul and put it into this body and you make a monster out of this person. So I think there's even people who are corpse thieves outside of Sunderhearth.
Absolutely.
They make money just bringing in, good vessels.
And so one of the things we established really early on was the first interconnected way in and out of Sunderhearth that was not the main gate was the moat, right? They needed supplies to come in originally. That's probably one of the main ways that bodies are smuggled in is through the moat, which is gross. But also,
because that's where they get all their drinking water from. I mean,
yeah, but
it's wonderful.
Does it also mean that you can have a big bad that exists outside of Sunderhearth, right? This warlord from time gone by that the few remaining orcs or whatever trolls are like, yeah, we want this guy back because he led us to glory. And so there's this fear of, all of a sudden that tomb's empty. And all right, that means that they're smuggling his body into, and we've got to get in there and stop it before this happens. Like you have an entire game based on let's not let, Doomsday out of the box.
So you literally have like cairn guards, like people who literally guard your corpse to keep these thieves from stealing it. If you were, a good enough specimen that you think that, the people inside of Sunderhearth might want to cram a soul into it, you're going to have people 24/7 who are watching over your dead body.
Right. And then I imagine you have this group on the outside who keeps their ear to the ground to the rumors of people going, no, let's go get, Bloodletter Bob back up. All we have to do. And so that group on the outside is like, nope. So they hunt down where Bloodletter Bob was buried and they ensure now that he can't come back. They're the good guys who are digging up corpses on the outside and burning them or destroying them or moving them or hiding them because they don't want us to come back. And then like Jeremy said, like kings, princes, queens, like their bodies have to be protected because if the king loses his queen and then they kidnap her and raise her and now hold her for ransom or whatever. Like that's, I mean, losing someone once is wicked. Having to lose them twice is even crazier. Or, the queen, he sends the queen over to get rezzed, and it's not her mind that comes back. And so now you have these, entities in powerful positions that are not the people they're supposed to be. Like,
And someone in chat just brought up something that was awesome, with trapping your graves and like the Egyptian and everything. I really like that idea a lot, and that could be an entire one-shot campaign, as you are trying to steal someone's body, and you have to get past their guards, and you have to get past the traps, and so on and so forth. Like, I like it.
Yeah, like you could even have it to where, that's somebody's connection. You knew them in life and you knew that they wanted to be resurrected if they ever were killed. They died. Their family said, no way, locked them inside of a tomb, and you're doing a good thing.
You could still be the good guy. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But you're still breaking the law and having to smuggle a body across a boundary and find the right soul. So yeah, there's a lot of potential in a lot of this stuff that is going into the setting.
So dowsers have gotten way more powerful in this episode, right? Originally, they were just these smugglers who were opening gates for you. And now they control an entire industry around resurrecting people, right? Like, there's going to be dowsers who are, what their specialty is corrupting soulfarers, bringing them over so that they can get the training on how to cross over with these souls, so that when someone comes in and says, hey, we need Bob Bloodletter brought back, these dowsers can take that training, go get him, and that's the completion of the deal, right? These guys are multifaceted now. Like, they're probably as well trained and magically powerful as the wardens themselves. Just maybe they don't have the same organization, and that's what keeps them subpar. So wardens, there's too much infighting, right? It's like the Hearth Wardens have a very strict sort of hierarchy, and these guys don't. They've sort of broken into their own clans. Like, it's gangs. Like, dowsers are gangs, and they'll fight amongst each other for the business. And that's the only thing that's keeping them from being as powerful as Hearth Wardens. Well, that, and they don't have a giant fire elemental on their side. But,
Well, yeah, and you have these nodes that we've already kind of established all around the perimeter. And so, like, these different groups of dowsers fight over... They fight these cold wars, these secret wars, because the Hearth Wardens, if they find out, they're going to come in and stomp out the entirety of them if they make too much noise. So they have to fight like this quiet turf war about who's going to actually have the capability of dousing this particular node and getting people in and out of Sunderhearth.
I mean, maybe even to the point we talked about the Hearth Wardens being spread pretty thin, because now that people realize they can leave Sunderhearth, like, they're not as apt to join up. So you get some of these villages that are a bit further out, and the Hearth Wardens can't make it there as often to help them when the chaos hits them, but the dowsers can, because that's their territory. And so the village starts aligning more with the dowsers than they do with the Hearth Wardens, because that protection matters more than being good.
And you saying that the Hearth Wardens are spread really thin. Just random thought. Potentially the reasoning for that is, since more and more is being smuggled out, several of the Hearth Wardens have had to go out to vacuum up and clean up the wet sponge. Like, they have some kind of device or item or empty husks that they can go refill with magic from the outside, and they are then bringing them back. So their job has gotten larger than they're capable of handling. So they're spread thin and have to patrol and do other things.
Yeah, we had broached the question before of if the mess of magic got outside of the containment of Sunderhearth, did the Hearth Wardens deal with it, or was that left up to the outside?
Well,
I think we just answered that, right?
There were Hearth Wardens on both sides at the beginning, right? Like there were people that decided I have to stay on the inside.
So the Hearthwardens are inside. The Council of Martyrs
That's what it was.
were the clerics and wizards and stuff who were willing to give up their magic. But as we've sort of crafted this, we've come to realize that the Council of Martyrs are much more fallible than the Hearthwardens. They haven't had to fight as hard. And so, like, one of the higher ups in it we know is completely corrupt and working with the Two-Faced King. But I think you hit on something that's amazing. Is I think there are some Hearthwardens who don't feel their duty stops at the border, right? Their duty was to contain chaos, not, to ride around border patrol. So they have, some of them, a smaller group of them, have begun to cross out and try and clean up and drag back in and stop it from happening.
Or like an elite group, like the SWAT team or whatever kind of thing.
Yeah, but I mean, however you look at it, like some of them have gone outside there. The younger people from the villages realize that with the appropriate amount of time and effort, they can leave Sunderhearth. And so the need to have a future that was a Hearthwarden isn't as strong. And so I think one of the numbers we'd put on it is at any given time, there's only between 12 and 14 Hearthwardens for all of Sunderhearth. So Dowsers outnumber them incredibly.
Well, and have y'all come to a number of how many different outposts there are that have to be?
No. I think we said we're going to leave it kind of amorphous. Yep. How many do you need? Like, there's going to be a couple of major ones that we know exist, obviously.
Sure.
The Hearth at Sunderhearth is definitely one. And then the other one that we kind of discussed is where the moat drains into the Salt Sea. We know there's a city that sits at the bottom of that. That's kind of the only two we've really said exist. And maybe through, more sessions like this, a couple other ones will crop up.
Well, never mind.
Okay.
Well, wouldn't there have to be one at the end of the Salt Sea that's keeping the border of the water wall?
Unless it's just how magic exists, right? If the spell going kablooey that killed the son of the god is what pushed the water back, then no. If the containment of Sunderhearth is what holds the water back, then yes. And so I guess we could actually decide that right this second if we wanted. Which way is more interesting? That there's a city out there completely cut off from everybody by a giant freaking desert. I mean, that's kind of cool, right? Like that actually might be the city that is the furthest away from magic, from the epicenter. And how crazy is it to live somewhere where the water is this lacking thing, and to have a translucent wall behind you where there's an ocean on the other side of it, and all you have to do is just let that wall down for a little bit and you can get the water. Sure, it's salt, but we can fix that.
Well, I don't think it would necessarily be any further from the epicenter, because the very definition is that they're equidistant, from the center. But I think because it is separated by such a vast salt flat, and there's nothing between there. It's literally coastline and then this massive salt flat that has these Moses-style walls of water, that kind of like go along the entirety of the outside, and they're just kind of at the far end of all of that. I dig that a lot. I think it's really cool. That place would be shady as hell.
But it would be hard to do any like in and out traffic from there, because it would be very deep. And
so what if it becomes the capital, like the meeting place for dowsers, because it's no one's territory? There's no need to have a dowser there. So what are you going to do? Douse into the ocean? Yeah. So that's neutral ground. That's the black market.
So it never in the history has been doused. So the Hearthwardens don't go out there very often. It's very far. It's very hard, and there's never been.
Nobody wants to go out that way.
Right, and because the Hearthwardens don't come out, but chaos still will. These are people who are hardy. They are determined. They are shady as all get out, and they are probably the only place that has what's seemingly close to a standing militia, because they have to fight back everything on their own. but in exchange for it, dowsers bring them stuff that they need, right? In exchange for the protection and for the meeting. And so if you need something, it's probably crossed hands there. If you're looking for someone there's probably heard of it. And if you are one of these rock stars that goes into the center and comes back out, where you go to tell people you've done it is there.
And I think there's probably like at the coastline on both like curves, like literally the last virulent point inside of Sunderhearth that you can get to before having to cross this vast desert. These kind of staging areas are like the ports in France were, or in Italy were, whenever the Crusades were going on. It was literally this is the last stop, this is the last gas for 500 miles kind of thing. And so those cities are booming because it's the launching place for any but any trek or journey that's going to set out across this vast salt flat. And so in those places, there's so much trade and a big business for journeying. Animals of burden, supply, water skins, backpacks. All of those things would be in abundance in these other cities.
Oh man! So a normal town, village, city inside of Sunderhearth is going to be this dot on the map, right? Because the closer people live, the easier they are to protect each other. Supplies are to share, so on and so forth. On this coastline, instead of it being a dot, the city is spread along the coastline. Because when a merchant showed up and said, "Hey, I'm going to start selling this," and Dave over there was selling the same thing, he just moved a little further down the coastline to set up what he was selling, because there's no guarantee of which direction you're going to come to try and get out to. So you have this sprawling city that just runs the coast there. At any given point, you have merchants all along it, inns all along it, taverns all along it. It's just like a permanent dockside of a city that just runs, in that little bay that would sit there.
Cool. Trucking right along. I think the more episodes that we have done, the harder it's become to not let ideas germinate into something that's fully fledged. I think just because there's so much more detail to kind of start branching off of. But it's hard.
Yeah, well, that's what I thought. This kind of really was trying to do a little bit of that, but so that might be my fault. But.
No, I love it. It's very, very tempting.
Right.
This is saucy minx.
All right, so I'm looking through this primer I was supposed to have done, and then the world exploded, and I did not get done. But I've got some things in here where I sort of made blanks. Right, we can I can run through some of them. We can kind of go, oh, that's kind of cool. Let's chat about that.
Yeah, throw it at us. We'll see what sticks.
Right, exactly. All right, so some of the things that we touched on but did not get into too much. There is a dwarven kingdom that exists outside of Sunderhearth. Those are the guys who were working on black powder and have kind of done that to the point where the Shattered King, the Sundered King, is looking at going to war with them. That's kind of all we know about that.
They were outside, and that was where the fire elemental had originally, like that Lonely Mountain kind of thing, I thought the Lonely Mountain was inside.
So the Lonely Mountain is on the inside. One of the kingdoms that existed before Sunderhearth became its own entity was a more or less dwarven entity, kingdom, clan, whatever. And when magic went away, they pushed real hard into black powder versus other sciences. And that's kind of all we had said about them, was that they had gotten to the point that rumor is that they had perfected the use of black powder, and it was something now that the antagonistic and pride and power hungry king of the outside was willing to go to war over, is kind of all we had touched on. Because dwarves were out, one of the races that obviously existed before the Sundering, because we had talked about the Sundering having changed certain races, and that's how you get things. We talked about the extinction of dragons, because the dragon god had actually come through the portal to the material plane inside of Sunderhearth and had been killed, and so dragons just so we got that going on. I can't spell. We have the Shattered one. We got the Hearth Wardens. We've kind of done a lot with them already. The Council of Martyrs on the outside. All we know is that a lot of them previously, but now we're talking 3-4 generations ago, were wizards and clerics and stuff that had sacrificed their magic. But we know there's a corrupt individual inside of it, but that's kind of all the note says. Like, I keep referring to him as Cardinal Richelieu, so we don't have really anything on him. The geography of Sunderhearth, we know there's the moat, we know there's the sand sea, we know that there is the witness and the abyss around it, and we know that there is the river that runs out of the moat and off the cliff into the sand sea, and then that's created a bog around it. That's kind of it. Like, and honestly, like in the gods section, when we talked about religion, all we know is that there was a god of magic, and apparently there was a god of dragons. That's it. We haven't touched on the cosmology or anything like that.
But in the setting, all of them are gone, so they're not.
Well, really they're all pulled back. Yeah. So what doesn't really matter other than the namesake of saying that they existed, unless.
Yeah. So for your game, if you want there to be this particular pantheon or that particular pantheon, they're not here anyway. So it's not. I don't think it's really worth getting into.
Yeah, I agree. Leaving it undeveloped, I think, is probably the better call.
So if dragons just fell straight out of the sky, for example, is that kind of what you're? I think what the other video was alluding to. There's a potential that could have impacted quite a bit.
Yeah, I think it's likely that there's entire villages that were wiped out from one that fell from the sky and just landed on him.
Yeah, it was above the clouds, couldn't even see it, but
The crazy thing is, in a normal fantasy setting, you would go, oh, well, maybe there's a village that sprung up next to it so they could harvest the parts of the dragon. Well, in a non-magical world, it's just meat and leather. Like, But do those resources now mean something inside of Sunderhearth, because there are no dragons inside of Sunderhearth? Do those resources mean something? Are there people outside who are going, wait a second, if we take this stuff and bring it into Sunderhearth and we can find a skilled smith inside there, can they still make dragon plate armor, and et cetera, et cetera?
Now, if there was a giant war going on, did one of the armies not have a dragon on their team, so that there is 0 dragons inside Sunderhearth?
I don't think so. When we had briefly talked about like the cosmology, like off camera, we kind of compared dragons to like the more like mythological titans of Greek mythology.
Yeah,
like
sure.
They're not like the common monster. They were these powerful entities, which is part of what made it such a big deal when they just poofed.
Okay. So kind of like the idea of, instead of a city cropping up next to a dragon corpse, that there's now a city inside of it because that fell on top of it.
They just built around it. Yeah.
Or like the soft underbelly from the, I don't know, like it just landed in such a way with the terrain like was rocky enough that it fell, and then like they're under it and didn't die.
Guardians of the Galaxy, right, where the whole planet is inside of a Titan's head. Yeah. All right, so let's touch on something real quick. D&D has a there you go, touching. D&D has a commodity-based magic system, right? In the DMG, you can go buy this magic item, this magic item, this magic item. Sunderhearth, that's not the case, right? Like, magic items are much rarer. They are harder to come by. They have more meaning. But do you just kind of say, hey, leave that up to the DM to how much commonality there is in magic items, and suggest that in order to stay with the tonality, they should be rarer than a normal setting, like so that wand of cure wounds with 15 charges means a lot more than it does in a common game?
I don't know, because you could have a high magic game in Sunderhearth, I would feel like, if you really wanted to, but
you would. But by the definition of things, whoever's cranking out those magic items is going to be constantly infested with monsters.
Yeah. But it's an NPC that I don't have to worry about. So
right, but if it's in the town that your players are in, like you're like, oh hey, we're gonna go visit Henry Ford's, magic carpet factory. Well, that's cool that everyone's flying around with magic carpets in this area. However, you also have to worry about every other thing you come in contact with trying to suck your soul out or eat you because of the magic.
Yeah, I think that's exactly how you would end up with like a lone wizard's tower, kind of where a town used to be, but everybody moved away because they were tired of dealing with the weird shit that kept happening. And so now you just have this wizard who lives by himself in this town, and he's the one who makes all these weird magic items, and maybe they're results of some of the experiments that he's been doing. He's turning out monsters and magic items just hand over fist, without a care in the world, because he's just doing what he wants to do.
So I just want you to imagine for a second the Will Smith I Am Legend, but he's a wizard. And he's the one that caused it. So he's walking around talking to these automatons and golems that he's made in the movie store because he still needs company, but no one else could live there because of all the monsters. All right, Netflix, get on it. I don't really have anything else that's jumping out. And it's 10 o'clock. Do we want to go? All right, Mike, what's your signature here, bud?
Yeah, I think we can start winding it down. We're at an hour and a half, so.
Okay. So there's been a lot of talk about a fire elemental that has given all this power. So I think that this fire elemental was talked to and has done this willingly. I don't know if y'all have defined that or whatever.
So the fire elemental that currently resides in the hearth of the castle is the queen.
I missed that. Okay, I like it.
And
it was a fire elemental and the queen that kind of brought together.
She had something in her that allowed that sort of bonding to happen. Just like her daughter, which is the small fire elemental that's kept in the demi plane that the hearth wardens have.
Oh wow! Okay, I love it. I don't know how I missed that either. But so my signature was not going to be about the fire elemental. It's going to be about the water elemental. That was his domain, was the salt flats. So instead of them getting permission and asking, and then them complying and saying, yes, I will do this to the betterment of the world, they tried to force it. And it fought back. So their original plan was to put a bubble around the Sunderhearth area. And bubble, they thought water, so they went to try to use this water elemental. And in doing so, the water elemental is now dead, so its domain dried up. which is what caused this salt flat. So if you want that city that's at the end of the salt flat to be further out, it can also have caused the magic to kind of bubble out in that area to be not a perfect circle any longer. But something along that lines with the creation of the salt flat being because of their failed attempt at their first attempt of protecting the Sunderhearth area.
I like that. I like that a lot. And I like the idea that similar to the fire elemental, where it has bonded itself to some kind of willing soul, and it now inhabits this, sundered hearth, that similar to that, this water elemental has bonded itself to some soul out there, and it's somewhere, that it is still in existence somewhere, and you have the capability of possibly coming across it.
I also like the idea that there's a earth elemental and an air elemental out there, but I only wanted to touch on the water one. So
I think if we're gonna go the water route, it makes sense, right? That when they knew, so you have this spell that goes off. It sunders the god of magic. Magic becomes super finicky. So people start panicking and they go, "We have to contain us. We have to contain us." These wizards and clerics and paladins and druids did not come up with this plan overnight. It took a little bit of time for them to research what type of magic and to cut off the world from magic. We're talking eldritch magic, right? This is ancient. So it makes sense that they had to go. They were like, look, the way the world exists, you have gods, you have dragons, and you have elementals. Those are the three titanic forces that shaped existence. The gods aren't going to help us because we just killed one of them. Dragons have been around for so long, and they're so not human that trying to talk to them, they'll just eat us. Let's go find these forces of nature. And so these different groups went out. The queen, being part of it, bonds with this fire elemental, and that becomes the hearth of humanity. They go out and they try and talk to this water elemental to sort of get that sort of viscous, bubbly nature of water to protect, and he doesn't want to, and so this fight ensues, and he's forced into helping at his own destruction, and in his destruction is negligently and unhappily bound to another person. I think the earth elemental is maybe part of what makes up the witness, right? That the earth elemental gave his sentience to this spot so that it's a permanence. It's the focal beacon of.
Yeah, he's what's holding the beacon.
Right. And does that mean that maybe the magic god's kernel is kind of what's powering the spell, and he's holding on to it to allow? Maybe. Do you really want to go steal it?
Why not?
And I think because Earth is that entity gave itself to basically root this thing in place, to keep it immovable and to hold it here.
Yeah. And if it's holding it, are you really even going to be able to get it from him?
Right.
Right. And a lot of times when you look at the element of air and you start comparing it back to people, air becomes that chaotic nature, right? Because it's the way it blows and manipulates. I wonder if I'm trying to figure out how to phrase this. If air has become the vehicle of magic inside of Sunderhearth, in that, man, I don't even know. I can picture it in my head. Just look right here. It's right there. Looks good, right? I don't know. Where's air? Help me out here.
Maybe that kind of is what helps fuel the way the soul energy works.
That's what I was trying to get to, right? So you travel through a shatter point, and there's this whooshing as you're, when the souls are being taken over by these soulfarers, it's on this wind through the there's that howling as it cuts through rock. And
so maybe the earth elemental was never bound. maybe it escaped and it's rampant. It's just loose, but it can't get out of Sunderhearth. So it's trapped inside of the overall bubble of Sunderhearth, but it's not bound to a soul the way that earth, fire, and water were.
What? Oh, man. What if it just jumps from person to person? Like it's so capricious that it binds long enough to accomplish something and then moves. And so there's it like in voodoo where you can be ridden by a Loa. Like it's possible.
Yeah, what was that movie?
The Etiquette campaign that you ran, Jeremy.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Wendigos. Very much kind of a similar-ish thing. It's a wind spirit that can kind of consume people. But what is that movie with John Goodman and Denzel Washington?
Fallen.
Yeah. It's about the demon that can transfer between people.
When you start hearing someone start singing "Time's on My Side," it's it's time to go.
Spooky. Yep.
So I mean, I think we can leave wind there for right now. But if anybody in the YouTube world has an idea, or if it comes up in another session, or Mike, you come up with an idea, we can just throw it in notes. But I love the idea that because this was so far beyond mortal, they had to go to these entities to accomplish this.
Yeah, and it's not even that these entities were able to just accomplish this. It's not something they were just simply able to do. They literally had to decide to give themselves over permanent, to this rite, this ritual. Yeah, I like that a lot.
Which gives to the truth or propaganda that were this wall to come down, it would destroy existence. Otherwise, why would the elementals have bound themselves? But that could just be propaganda. Awesome.
Yeah, I feel great. And yet again, that was 8, so we've got 9, 10, 11, 12, 4 more episodes before I can start running games. 4 more months. This is awesome.
Well, 5 more months, because you're going to have to do like a last episode that just sums everything up and compiles it all into one cohesive hump pile. Right. Unless that's what the 12th episode. I don't know.
We're not there yet. That's later Sunderhearth problems.
Right. Now we'll have to do like a mini. What you have to do, like a mini session 13, 14, and 15, where Jeremy and I take turns running, and we invite the creators back to play in groups together inside of the world they created for a session.
Oh yeah, I love that.
That's a great idea.
It'd be a really good way to kind of jump in and kind of dip your toes in the waters to go back with the people that helped build it.
People running in horror. What is this thing? I don't know. You created it.
This is your fault.
You did this to yourself.
Well, hello there. If it isn't the consequences of my actions. Yeah. So I guess that's about it. Mike, thanks for coming on, man. This was awesome.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for inviting me. It was a lot of fun.
Absolutely. As soon as we started talking about this, and we talked about these recap episodes, where we brought someone in that we knew that we could bounce ideas off of and help kind of polish, as you put it, a lot of the ideas that had already been established. Steve thought of his dad, and I was like, I know the guy. My dad. No, I'm just kidding. Mike.
But his dad wasn't available, so.
No, he hasn't been available for years now. Yeah, I was like, that's a no-brainer. Like, because you and I have spent so many hours just sitting just like this and just shooting stuff back and forth at each other and just seeing what makes sense and gets traction and kind of gains legs and starts running on its own. So I'm 100% happy that you agreed to do this and what you've added to the world. So thanks.
Thank you.
Steve, is there anything else you want to say to the peoples before we say night-night?
Not that I can think of. Yeah. I guess, go out and be good, and if you can't be good, be safe.
Amen. Yep. Wash your hands. Wear a mask. Be kind to each other.
Right.
Please. The
Please be
world is a
kind.
cruel enough place. Yeah, just be nice. Even with people who disagree with you. Be nice. So yeah, thank you everybody who turned in for this episode. It's another fantastic stepping stone through the process of creating this world, and I'm very, very much looking forward to getting the next 4 chapters of this done. I'm excited to see what Sunderhearth is going to look like at the end of this. So if you tuned in this evening, thank you so much. If you watched with us live, or if you're watching in the future, and until next time, may your dice roll high and your snacks always be within reach.